Check, 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 check. 1, 2, check, check. Yes. Check 1, check, check, check. 1, 2, check. Sound.
Trying to figure out what's the best way for me to do the
cuando veas el caminado de ese tremendo tumbao de una. Pasarás de quieto a lanzado, porque de seguro la vas a querer tener a tu lado. Es sin duda que si la ves que te has mirado, cuando veas el caminado de ese tremendo tumbao de una. Pasarás de quieto a lanzado, porque de seguro la vas a querer tener a tu lado. Yo quiero bailar con ella, puya, puya, esta noche en la caseta, puya, puya, quiero bailar con mi negra, puya, puya, y nadie que no se meta, puya, puya, esa palenquera que baila bonito, mueve su cadera en el rinconcito, esa palenquera que baila bonito, mueve su cadera en el rinconcito, baila, baila negra como la palmera, porque así se mueven todas las palenqueras, se mueve pa' aquí, se mueve pa' allá, esa palenquera si sabe bailar, se mueve pa' aquí, se mueve pa' allá, esa palenquera si sabe bailar.
Púyala, 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 sóbala, 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 que soba, que soba, que soba, que soba, ia, 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 ia.
Púyala, 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 sóbala, 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 que soba, que soba, que soba, que soba, ia, 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 ia.
Ellos hacen da pa' toma changaína, lo que está macaneado con tú, o tiene el asunto. Oye, los chan, jaja. sabe mucho. Ey, con vileza en la forma.
Rapalen, que es lo que hay.
RFP.
La clave te llamará. Pa' que baile mi guaguancó. Sentimiento. Homenaje a los rumberos de mi Cuba. Donde nacen los poetas de la rumba. Donde nacen los poetas del tambor. Tierra santa bendecida por la magia, energía que dibuja mi canción. Si algún día me alejara de la rumba, pediría en un reclamo devoción. Rumba, ay rumba, siempre rumba. Mi guaguancó. Rumba que nació aquí en mi barrio, donde los rumberos armonizan su tambor. Rumba.
Mississippi, goddamn, this is our last tune. We had some requests for it. Alabama's got me so upset. Tennessee made me lose my rest. And everybody knows about Mississippi, goddamn. Alabama's got me so upset. Tennessee made me lose my rest. Everybody knows about Mississippi, goddamn. Can't you see it? I know you can feel it. It's all in the air. I can't stand the pressure much longer. Somebody say a prayer. Alabama's got me so upset, and Governor Wallace has made me lose my rest. Everybody knows about Mississippi, goddamn. Hound dogs on my trail, school children sitting in jail. Black cat crossed my path. I think every day's gonna be my last. Lord have mercy on the land of mine. We all gonna get it in due time. I don't belong here, I don't belong there. I've even stopped believing in prayer. Don't tell me, I'll tell you. Me and my people just about do. I've been there, so I know. They keep on saying, go slow. That's just the trouble.
Too slow,
Washing the windows,
too slow,
picking the cotton.
too slow,
We're just plain rotten.
too slow,
We're too damn lazy.
too slow,
Our thinking's crazy.
slow.
Where am I going? What am I doing? I don't know. Just try to do my very best. Stand up, be counted with all the rest. Everybody knows about Mississippi, goddamn. Picket lines, school boycotts. They try to say it's a communist plot. All I want is equality for my sister, my brother, my people, and me. You like to to me all these years. You told me to wash and clean my ears and talk real fine just like a lady, and you'd stop calling me Sister Sadie. But my country is full of lies. We all gonna die and die like flies. I don't trust nobody anymore. They keep on saying go slow. That's just the trouble.
Slow.
Desegregation,
Too slow.
mass participation,
Too slow.
unification.
Too slow.
Do things gradually
Too slow.
will bring more tragedy.
Too slow.
Why don't you see it? Why don't you feel it? I don't know. You don't have to live next to me. Just give me my equality. 'Cause everybody knows about Alabama. Everybody knows about Mississippi. Everybody knows about Mississippi. Gone down. That's it.
Mississippi, goddamn. All right, good evening, everyone. Okay, a lot of new people. Let's try it again. Good evening, everyone. Wonderful. It's a beautiful chorus. So good to be here with you all tonight. My name is Saidi, and I'm part of the education team here at the People's Forum. I want to take a minute to introduce some other staff here at TPF. If you're staff, please raise your hand. Everyone's a little shy, but these are some of the folks who have helped to make this course possible for the thousands of people who have registered. So please, if at any point, either tonight or in the sessions going forward, if you have any questions, please find any one of us. All right. How are we feeling tonight? How are we feeling tonight? Oh, period. Okay. All right. Well, tonight I'm honored and excited to welcome you all to the first session of Hidden Histories of Rebellion in the U.S. And truly, what a crucial, dynamic, and important moment for us to study and learn lessons from our history of rebellion. Because when we look to Minneapolis and the 200 cities and thousands of everyday people, from high schoolers and faith leaders, who answered the call to join in solidarity with them, not only do we see mass uprising and rebellion happening, we are all part of building it today. So today we'll begin the first session of the series, The Battle for History, Why Trump Wants to Erase the Past. 1 year into the second Trump administration, their project and their agenda with Project 2025 has become unmistakably clear: to attack the living legacy of the Civil Rights Revolution. And we call it a revolution because it didn't just transform life for Black America. You know, it really propelled the fights for civil rights for people of all people in this U.S. The fight for women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, disability justice, Indigenous sovereignty. A fight that transformed the possibilities and horizons for every single movement for justice here in this country. And the Trump administration had set its sights on repelling advancements that have been fought for in this era, launching a battle against all working people in this country. A battle that takes the form of attacking DEI initiatives, which we know were just a drop in the bucket of really the huge progress that needs to be made. But it was a drop in the bucket that addressed the historic level of discrimination that people of color have faced in this country. This is also a battle that takes the shape of removing exhibits and any mention of the actual history of slavery and the foundations of this country. And it's also a battle that takes the form of attacking truly any telling of the real history of the US. So today we'll go over the larger agenda of the Trump administration and the actual conditions of the era they want to bring us back to. And most importantly, our incredibly important task in this moment. And we're also coming together to study the history of rebellion at an incredibly crucial moment, but I won't get too much into that. I'll actually leave it to Brian to talk to us about that today. So before I pass it over, I want to go over some general class logistics. So each class is generally around 2 hours long, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So I encourage you, as we're going through the lecture, to take notes of your questions, write them down, and when it comes time to Q&A, we'll have time to discuss them. So if you're in person, please raise your hand and wait for a mic runner to bring you a mic. That's so people on Zoom can hear us. And if you're on Zoom, please type your questions with the Q&A feature. So there's a good amount of us here in person, and there's hundreds of us online, so we won't be able to get to everyone's question, but please email them to us at education@peoplesforum.org. I also want to spend some time going over some general house guidelines. This is, actually before I do that, is this anyone's first time at TPF or for a TPF class? Awesome, and I'm sure there's a bunch of hands on Zoom. Well, welcome, this is a really special place, and I'm so excited for you to be here. This is a course in which over thousands of people have signed up for, and thousands of people from all different backgrounds, contexts, identities, location, who are coming together for many, what might be their first political education experience. And this is truly incredible, and also important that all of us come into this experience and environment with a shared understanding and expectations for how we relate to each other. It's our collective responsibility to keep this a comradely space, which means that we engage each other in good faith, with respect, and that there's never any space for any sort of political attack or any sort of political disagreement or debate. We encourage debate and discussion, but when it takes a personal line, that's when we have to address that. So please remember to engage each other in a respectful way, in openness, and in good faith. So, are we feeling good? Give me 1 thumbs up if you're ready. Give me 2 thumbs up if you're ready to start class. All right, with that, I'm excited to introduce our instructor for tonight, Brian Becker, a founding member of the Central Committee of the Party for Socialism Liberation and the National Director of the Answer Coalition, as well as the host of the Socialist Program. So let's give it up for Brian.
Thank you, Saidi, and it's great to see everybody here and the number of people who are online. It's really remarkable. There are thousands of people have signed up for this 8-part course. And I think the reason so many people have signed up is it corresponds to what's happening in society, where people are not just engaged in politics, but very directly involved in politics, engaged in the battle for politics. We saw in the case of Minneapolis on January 23rd, that was Friday, the first general strike in a city in the United States since 1934, 100,000 people, and the high temperature that day was 9 below zero. So this was a real testament to the fact that in spite of very difficult climate, people were ready to mobilize and did mobilize. I think we have a photo on one of the slides of the just immense outpouring of people. I mean, that's Minneapolis when it's like 10 below zero. All the teachers went on strike, the schools were closed down, the Somali small businesses shut down. All of the unions came together. That's very rare in the United States. It's not rare in France. It's not rare in Spain. It's not rare in Colombia. It's very rare in the United States, and it's an indication that we are at a moment, a watershed moment, in fact, for the direction of the country, and people are coming together to organize. Whenever people are active politically, when they're involved directly, the thirst, the hunger for political education becomes very, very evident. Because when you're just going about your business, your everyday life, you may be troubled about this or that, but when you're in struggle, when you're in motion, when you're at the battlefield, so to speak, when you're contesting with the police or with hostile media or an administration that demonizes you and describes you as domestic terrorists and then engages in all kinds of violence, and you fight back, you don't retreat, you're not intimidated, you stay strong. All of the issues that maybe would be routine or things that you wouldn't be considering, they become first and front and center in your own brains. That's how people's ideas change. And this course is about how people change and how change happens, how social change happens in the United States. Right now, there's an effort by the Trump administration and the MAGA movement and Project 2025 to create a very vast change in society. They are very serious about what their plans are. The firing of hundreds of thousands of federal workers in the first days of the Trump administration, the decimation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the decimation of the National Park Service, the elimination of any remnant from the civil rights movement, the telling of history, this full-scale assault against trans people, trans kids, the LGBTQ community, immigrants who are being targeted and demonized. This isn't just random, weird chaos created by a right-wing project. They have a plan. It's Project 2025 is the plan, and they intend to carry out a very significant change in the United States. And as a consequence of their very robust effort to carry out this change, they are meeting with the resistance of masses of people, and those people are determined to defeat MAGA. They're determined to defeat Project 2025. They're now determined to defeat ICE, and we believe firmly that MAGA will fail, that ICE will be defeated, that the Trump agenda will be defeated, that this effort to, quote, make America great again, which means, as Saidi said, to take America back before the civil rights movement, before what we call the civil rights revolution, transformed America and really, in a way, carried out a cultural revolution, not just an economic or social, but also a cultural revolution in the United States. The effort by ICE and MAGA and DOGE and all of these other acronyms associated with the Trump White House, we believe this will fail. In fact, we feel so confident that it will fail that it's a point of departure between our movement, which is a socialist movement, a Marxist movement, and many liberals who see what we see, who are anguished by what they see, rightfully, who are upset and outraged by the Trump administration's program, but they are basically have been engaged in a lot of hand-wringing, like everything is gone, the country's lost, what are we going to do? Maybe we should move. Just this whole kind of defeatist notion that because Trump is on a rampage that he will win, we think not only misses the point, but actually undermines the capacity of the people to fight. If you feel you've already lost, people generally tend to seek individual salvation, retreat, save yourself. But if you feel it's an unfought battle, in fact, if you feel that it's a battle that can be won, and that everything you believe in is at stake, instead of running, instead of seeking individual salvation, you stand with other people and you fight. And truthfully, bravery is a social phenomenon. Bravery is not simply an individual act of courage by some especially courageous person. If I'm brave, you're brave. If you're brave, I'm brave. If we're brave together, this feeling of struggle, this feeling of determination, this feeling that we can fight and win, this feeling that we refuse to surrender to racism or sexism or patriarchy or all of the bigotry and discrimination and hatred, if we feel that way and act that way, we can win. And if we don't, we can lose. So what we think and how we interpret the events isn't simply this, it's not something academic. It's something that I would say is a life and death issue for our movement. I'd like to bring up some photos of 3 individuals who have been murdered by ICE. First is Keith Porter, killed at the end of the year in Los Angeles. And followed by that, Renee Good, whose final words, right here, her final words to the ICE agent who shot her 3 times in the face were, dude, I'm not mad at you. And then he shot her 3 times in the face. And then finally, of course, Alex Preddy, you see this this full freeze, slow motion shot where he's on his stomach and the ICE agent takes his gun out, they shoot him in the back, and 9 more shots are fired. He's executed. This wasn't like a chaotic moment. Same with Renee Good, a chaotic moment where in the fog of war, people make quick decisions. No, this was cold-blooded executions intentionally carried out by ICE agents. In the case of Alex Preddy, they did that because they were upset about the general strike that happened the day before. They came out that morning and they were going to show people who's boss. He wasn't threatening anybody. He was filming them. They came over to him and the 2 women who were his friends. They pushed one of the women over. He steps in front and says, hey, don't do that. And then they come at him. They swarm him. He has a registered gun, which is his right. They take the gun away. Then they shoot him 10 times in the back. That was to send a message. And frankly, if there had been no general strike the day before, if there had not been this mass mobilization of the working class and young people in the Somali community the very day before, the killing of Alex Preddy would have been one more killing by an ICE agent. But instead, it sparked a nationwide opposition that's all over the media. Each and every one of you have been watching it, either on social media or mainstream media. And then 2 days later, Donald Trump says, well, I'm reconsidering. I'm going to bring Bovino, the Gestapo-like guy leading ICE in Minneapolis. I'm going to bring him out. We're going to take some of the agents out. We have to reconsider what exactly happened. Like this superficial effort to sort of de-escalate, to lower the temperature. The reason Trump did that is the country is at a boiling point over what ICE is doing. And I think everybody in this room knows it's at a boiling point. People are seething with anger. Seething with anger. And if you think about the country as a boiling pot with a lid, there's only 3 options. You lower the temperature, you take the lid off, or you let it explode. The country is a boiling pot right now because of the Trump administration's aggressions on many fronts, ICE being one of them. And so Trump right now is trying to lower the temperature. And the Somali students in particular know exactly what Trump is doing, and they are asking all of us not to lower the temperature, but to turn the temperature up. And we have a slide here about a call from the Somali students for this Friday, January 30th. They're asking that the effort that they carried out in Minneapolis to shut down Minneapolis, that we replicate that not just in one city, but all over the United States. ICE out, nationwide shutdown this Friday, January 30th. We're not looking to lower the temperature. We're looking to get ICE out. We're not trying to even get ICE out of Minneapolis. We want to abolish ICE. We want to abolish the entire instrument of repression. Right now, there's going to be an issue that'll come up probably on Friday of whether or not ICE will be funded again. The Democrats funded it the last time around. There's a lot of pressure right now growing in the country. If you say, I'm going to call my congressperson and tell them vote no, that won't mean that much. The only thing that will really stop this ICE war against the people is if the ruling class in America fears that the opposition to what ICE is doing will lead not only to resistance and rebellion, but possibly revolution. Because that's how the civil rights movement actually made the gains it did. It was the threat of revolution. It was the insurrection that was taking place in cities and towns, big and small, all over the United States, starting in 1955 and going up until 1972. That's when even Richard Nixon, the ultimate racist who adopted the Republican Southern strategy, he was the one who said, let's have affirmative action. He was the one who created far-reaching economic reforms, concessions to the civil rights movement. It wasn't a liberal Democrat, it was this racist, anti-communist Republican, Richard Nixon, because Nixon knew, as did the other ruling class politicians, that if they didn't make serious concessions at that moment, the United States was going to erupt into civil war, and the government would be the target of a righteous indignation by the people, led by the black community, but joined by Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans, white people. I mean, that's what was actually happening in 1969 and 70. Which brings me to the question that I started with. How does change happen? How does change happen? And that's really the theme of our 8-part class. Our basic, and this is, I'm going to come back to why, when we think about this question and the answer to the question, why MAGA will fail, why Trump will fail, and why we shouldn't be involved in hand-wringing, we should be engaged in fierce struggle to stop them, and if we do, we can win. All right, let's think about the civil rights movement and what it achieved. We call it a civil rights revolution. It was still a capitalist system after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the next year, the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It wasn't a revolution in the sense that it was a socialist revolution, but I just want to describe a little bit how things were at that time and how things changed. And we have a number of slides, and maybe you guys can just interpret my words, because I won't know which slide is which, but you're very perspicacious, and I know you'll figure it out. In 1964, America was an apartheid state, a literal apartheid state. And this, we're talking about in my lifetime. We're talking about not ancient history. I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. But I'm old enough that it was an apartheid state when I was a child, a literal apartheid state. In Rochester, New York, where I grew up, Eastman Kodak was the company that ran the city. There was 250,000 people lived in Rochester. 55,000 employees worked at Kodak. My father was one of them. He was a research chemist. And of the 55,000 workers at Kodak, there were almost no black workers. I think there were about 70 out of 55,000, because Kodak was that racist. And in 1964, in Rochester, 6 months before the rebellion in Harlem took place, in that same year, there was an uprising in the black community in Rochester, New York. And here's the headlines: Negro mob riots here. Homer declares state of emergency. The police came out. The youth fought back. It went on for almost a week. It was the precursor to all the other rebellions: Harlem in '64, Of course, the Watts insurrection in 1965, Newark 1967, Detroit 1967, all over the country, in fact. Of course, when Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, that night, 120 cities went into insurrection. 120 cities, including Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. And when I say insurrection, it was a state of complete rebellion. The U.S. military was sent to 120 cities, probably more that night. During this time when the rebellion happened in Rochester, this is somewhat of a personal anecdote, I guess, an organization called FIGHT, F-I-G-H-T, FIGHT, I can't remember what all the acronym stands for. I know the G is for God, and FIGHT is for, F is for fight, right? Anyway, you get the picture. FIGHT demanded that there would be 600 jobs set aside out of these 55,000 for unemployed black people in Rochester, New York, to which Eastman Kodak said, no way, we will never allow you to tell us who we're going to hire and who we're not going to hire. We won't do it. And that initiated a protracted struggle in Rochester, New York, over whether Kodak would grant these 600 jobs. I mean, that's not a big ask. That's a pretty small ask. But they said no. And it dragged out and became, and you can research it at home, it became a nationwide sort of a symbol of the fight against capitalist corporate America and its racist discrimination policies. The apartheid character of America wasn't simply governmental laws, and it wasn't simply the South. You know, Rochester's 30 miles as the crow flies from Toronto, Canada. It's pretty north. The deep north, you could call it. And they said no, and it became an epic battle. My parents were involved in this because my parents were involved in the civil rights movement. So my father, as a chemist at Kodak, actually said, I support the demand for 600 jobs. And it basically ended his career. And all of our neighbors, we lived in this little suburb of Rochester called Irondequoit, which was 1 mile from the city. And it was and my parents had 5 kids. They decided they needed a bigger house. These suburbs opened up, and they were all white, literally all white. As a matter of fact, they were sundown towns. They didn't call them sundown towns, but they were sundown towns. And meaning, if you're a sundown town, there were 3,000 of them. You can read a book called The Sundown Towns if you'd like. You can also research that. 3,000 sundown towns. Sundown towns meant if you were black or a person of color and you were there after sundown, you were going to get hurt or you were going to get killed. This was another form of apartheid in America. So this little area, Irondequoit, New York, where we lived, was a sundown town, even though we didn't know that word at the time. But there were no black people who lived there or were permitted. No banker would give a black family a mortgage there. Again, this is not Alabama. It's not Mississippi. It's Rochester, New York. When my father actually took a stand and supported the demand for the 600 jobs, he was completely, as was my mother, completely demonized by all of our neighbors. The entire neighborhood stood with Kodak. Even though these were working class white people, they were standing with Eastman Kodak and insisting that only Kodak should be allowed to make hiring decisions, and if Kodak wanted to have all white workforce, that was their decision. That's how it was in 1965, in 1964. If you go back further, before the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, for instance, in Mississippi and in South Carolina, if you go back even, say, to the year 1900, The African American population in Mississippi and in South Carolina, those are two states, and there are several others. The African American population was the majority. It wasn't a black minority, it was a majority in Mississippi and in South Carolina. How many black voters voted in 1900 in Mississippi and South Carolina? That would be none, or less than 0.5%, because the apartheid system's laws were enforced through terror. The terror of the police department and the terror of the KKK, and they weren't distinctive in different organizations. The cops and the Klan weren't just working hand in hand, as the chant went. They were the same people. The cops and the Klan were the same people, and so were the judges, and so were the bosses, and so was the Chamber of Commerce. America was so profoundly racist that in 1954, when the Brown versus Board of Education decision was taken, that was a decision by the Warren Court making apartheid, separate, segregated schools no longer legal. It said there's no such thing as separate but equal schools, which is where Jim Crow was established in 1896. The Supreme Court in 1954 ruled that's not possible to be separate and equal because the black schools were underfunded, to put it mildly. All of the resources in society were flowing to the white schools, and they said it's against the law. So what happened in response to the Brown versus Board of Education movement? There was the beginning of the Academy movement. And the Academy movement was vast numbers of people white people in southern states took kids out of public schools even before the first black student was able to come into the public white school, and they created private academies. And the states, this is like the charter school movement, this is like where it really started, was that the government then took public monies and gave it to private academies who would use religious criteria and other false BS metrics to basically make sure they were all white. And the academy movement spread everywhere throughout the South. And so even though the law of the country changed, meaning you now had to have desegregation, it was the same. It was essentially the same. And that was a mass movement. Now, at the same time, by the way, why did the Supreme Court finally, after 1783 till 1954, not quite 200 years, why did it finally decide to say apartheid was illegal in public schools? Because America had a problem. The problem was, after World War II, China had a communist revolution, North Korea had a revolution, Vietnam had a revolution, Indonesia was having a revolution, India was having a revolution. The colonialized people of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, they were rising up in anti-colonial movements, and they were led by communist parties. Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, Kim Il-sung in North Korea, Mao Zedong in China. And the U.S. said, well, we're fighting for freedom against these communists. And the communists would say, you have apartheid. Where's that freedom? How can you have apartheid, in the case of Mississippi, for the majority of the population and talk about democracy and freedom? And so all the people in the so-called third world, the global South, when they heard, wait, the United States has apartheid against black people, and Soviet Union and China and North Korea and Vietnam are championing the causes of national liberation, it became a gravitational pull towards the communist movement. So the Warren decision, the Warren Court decision in 1954 was the first effort by the American ruling class to overcome this major obstacle in the Cold War, which gave all of the advantage to the communists. So they said, we have to start to reform and get rid of apartheid because it doesn't conform to the new reality of a world that is becoming anti-colonial. So it was the international situation that actually motivated sectors of the U.S. ruling class to make this reform. But other sectors of the ruling class thought this was terrible. They weren't thinking like how to compete with the communists in China or Vietnam or someplace else. They were like, we want to control the Mississippi. We want to control Alabama. If you start to let the majority, meaning the black population, vote, we're going to lose control. So we don't care about China. We care about Mississippi. So you had a struggle between different sectors in the U.S. capitalist ruling class. As a Marxist, it's very important for all of us who are Marxists to understand that a class in society, whether it's the working class, the proletariat, the petty bourgeoisie, the capitalist, whatever class you're talking about, classes are not monoliths. It's not like there's one grand ruling class that all meets together and they have one thought pattern. They're not the ruling class because they all think the same thoughts. They're the ruling class because they own the banks and corporations. But within that class, they can have different strategic views, different philosophies, et cetera, et cetera. So one section of the ruling class was trying to reform American capitalism away from this extreme racism, and other sectors of the ruling class were promoting what amounted to a mass white racist movement in America. When you all think about, if you're younger, if you think about the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, you think Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, Kwame Ture, Rosa Parks. That's what we think about. But having been alive at that time and also politically active for the latter part of the 60s, the dominant force was not the civil rights movement, it was the white racist movement. And people don't know that. People think of the 60s as being like this panacea of leftism. I mean, you think of Woodstock and anti-war and the Dr. King's 1963 march. There was a mass movement of white supremacy against the civil rights revolution. And that movement, the white supremacist movement, was defeated. And I'll say a little bit about why it was defeated, but it was defeated. The MAGA movement is the resurrection of that old defeated white supremacist movement. When they say make America great again, they mean to go back to the era where white supremacists had, ruled the roost without dispute. And what they mean by that is not like just white working class people. If they're reactionary, if they're racist, they can be pawns in the game, but they're not owning corporations. They don't have investments in the Middle East. They're wedded to racist capitalists. It's a form of class collaboration, but it's not the working class, even the racist ruling class, that benefits from the system. That's a system that benefits what Project 2025 wants to create or accumulate wealth for, which is the capitalists. So there was a war going on in the 50s and 60s. The Make America Great Again movement is really an effort to go back and undo all of the social, economic, and especially cultural achievements that came about as a consequence of the civil rights revolution. Again, the fact that this kind of extreme racism greeted the beginning of civil rights reforms was not enough to stop it. And ultimately, because the movement succeeded on many fronts, even though it's still a capitalist system, because there were so many cultural, economic, and social changes in America, as a consequence of the civil rights revolution, America has changed, and the right-wing sector of the bourgeoisie in America feels that they need to create a new form of governance to get rid of the social, economic, and cultural changes, and that if they do, America will be great again, which is also bullshit. I mean, America is a declining economic power. It's not a declining military power. China is the advancing economic power in the world, and so will other countries in the global south as they acquire technology, including India, including many other countries. The U.S. domination on the economics front is routinely diminishing, but they're using military power at home and abroad to be able to sort of reverse the historical trajectory. Now, let's go back. The '64 Civil Rights Act made segregation illegal, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act made it impossible for the southern states to create any voting laws in those states without the agreement of the Justice Department on the federal level. That meant that all of the tricks and patterns of racist disenfranchisement in southern states was no longer allowed. And there was a flourishing of black political representation in the South. I would say those two bills, the 1964 Voting Rights Act and the '65 Voting Rights Act, are by far the biggest, most important, most far-reaching pieces of legislation in American history. How did it happen? How did it happen? If you look at the U.S. Congress in 1964 that passed these two far-reaching bills, from a point of view of demographic composition, it's exactly the same as Congress in 1954 when it upheld apartheid. There were very few black representatives. The Congress was dominated by the Dixiecrats, the Southern Bloc. It's the same Congress. So how did this Congress that was so reactionary and racist in 1954 pass the most far-reaching legislation in American history 1 decade later? Well, they didn't change. So what did change? What changed? People changed. The masses of people, by the millions, changed because they became political actors. The civil rights movement was the activation of tens of millions of, quote, ordinary people who became political. When we look at Minneapolis, what just happened on January 23rd, that was not 100,000 socialists. I mean, maybe in a year or two there'll be socialists, if all goes well, if they're watching our classes. But no, that's not what motivated them. What motivated them was the brutality of ICE, the terrible right-wing assault by the Trump administration. And when people get involved in the struggle, like take Alex Preddy, who was assassinated. He's an intensive care unit nurse at a VA hospital. He was leading his life. He was doing good deeds. He was obviously a conscientious and beloved medical professional. But he wasn't like he wasn't going out Saturday mornings with his cell phone to, film ICE agents or police agents. He was one of those hundreds of thousands of Americans around the country who have been brought into politics right now. And what brought them into politics? It wasn't only Trump, and it wasn't only Project 2025. It wasn't only the assault on our basic democratic rights in the United States. It was also what happened starting on October 8th, 2023, when it came to Palestine. Because how many millions of young people in particular, and many who are probably in this room, came to demonstration not once, not twice, not once a year, not a conference once in a while, but all the time, because they were witnessing a genocide in real time on their smartphones. The first time people who weren't at the battlefront or at the scene of a genocide, we watched it. And we also knew that the government that speaks in our name was lying. The government that sends our tax dollars to fund the genocide was lying. That all of their arguments, every single argument about like in the early days, remember when a hospital was blown up and the Israelis said, well, that was a Hamas rocket that misfired and it landed on the hospital. And then there was 2 weeks of debate in the New York Times and MSNBC and Fox News, like, who destroyed the hospital? Well, a year later, all the hospitals are destroyed. And there's no question about why they're destroyed. The Israelis destroyed them. Every university was destroyed because the Israelis blew them up. And if people had just been at home watching, they might have been mortified, they might have been upset, they might have wanted to change the channel because it's so disturbing. But if you're in the streets, if you're organizing, if you're with your fellow students or coworkers or people in your community or your family, and you're in the streets and you're out there every day when it's cold or when it's raining, no matter what, you're there with the Palestinians, and then you see how the lies are being presented by the capitalist media, you realize that the problem here isn't a bad policy. The problem isn't a mistaken policy. The problem isn't a bad politician or a mistaken politician. The problem really is a system. And then you think, well, what is this system? Does it have a name? I mean, if you ask school kids, what's the name of the U.S. system, they might say democracy or republic. Nobody's in the past would have said, oh, we live in the capitalist system. And all the problems that we're facing or seeing are the problems of capitalism. But when you're in struggle and this phenomena, this process is taking place, and you're looking for answers and you're thinking and seeing for yourself, it's not a mistaken foreign policy or a mistaken leader or a bad party as opposed to a good party. When you realize it's a system, then you want to know, what is this system? Who benefits from it? Who profits from it? What's it called? How did it evolve? How did it get here? And you also think, can't we have a different system? I mean, the kings and queens of medieval Europe told the serfs, this is how God wanted it. You're a serf, and I'm a noble because this is God's will. And a lot of serfs believed that because they were devout religious folks who went to church, and the clergy, who was the second estate, along with the nobility, told them, yeah, this is exactly what God wants. This is exactly, you do all the work, we pray, and all the money goes to the church and to the king. And then finally, there's a revolutionary process, and people realize, well, no, this is not what God wants. This is a system that benefits a ruling class, and we can have a new system. And once you have a new system, you don't normally want to go back to the old system. Like, there's not a yearning in Europe right now, in spite of how messed up Europe's politics is. Nobody's thinking, like, can't we have an absolute monarch? Like, there's not like some beck and call for a return to medievalism. In fact, if somebody said, yeah, let's have the farm workers be serfs, they would be destroyed. It would be completely impossible. MAGA wants to go back to the old system before the civil rights revolution and say, let's go back. And I have this water, so I'm going to actually sip it. People don't want to go back. Some people may want to go back. I mean, you know, what is MAGA really and what is Project 2025? It's a coalition of two things. There's two wings to this. The MAGA, Make America Great Again, is really a vessel really just for Donald Trump. And Trump was this seemingly anomalous, weird, reactionary, reality TV guy, very different from all other politicians, catering to sort of anti-immigrant, racist notions, especially in the white population, and especially the rural white population. And the electoral system is constructed that gives a great advantage to rural and small towns in America. Even though 87% of the people in the country live in urban areas, which are generally not aligned politically and ideologically and culturally with what MAGA stands for. So MAGA, in one sense, is a vessel for Trump, who became a popular politician with what part of the population? Maybe 30%. Not really more. It's probably 30%. Project 2025 is something different. Project 2025's author is Russell Vought. Russell Vought is a longtime I don't know, when do you call somebody a fascist or a semi-fascist? I mean, it's a judgment call. But Vought believes that the problem in America was the Civil Rights Revolution, because the Civil Rights Revolution detonated other movements, the women's rights movement, what was at that time called the gay liberation movement, the movement that allowed disabled people to have access to things, the environmental protection movement that inhibited what corporations could do, that regulated and told corporations they couldn't completely poison the air and water, the lakes and rivers and air at their own discretion, that there had to be some government oversight. That came also from that civil rights revolution. Russell Vought believes that the Democratic Party and the sector of the ruling class that's aligned with the Democratic Party accommodated themselves to the civil rights revolution changes because they are communists. He believes the Democratic Party leadership is communist. What does that make us then? They actually believe it. When you read Russell Vought's stuff, he was like, these people are communists, and the reason he knows they're communists is that they supported civil rights. Now, they didn't really support civil rights, but the Democratic Party acclimated itself to the demands of the civil rights movement when they became institutionalized. So, right now, the woman, I have this quote, let me see if I can find it. This woman who is the head of the, just when you need your notes not to disappear. Who knows the head, the leader, the woman who's the leader of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission? Does somebody know her name? If I had my notes, I could tell you, but I can't find them. Anyway, you'll look it up when you get home. She just made an announcement that she's urging all white male employees who felt that they have been the victims of racism and discrimination to come forward and file a claim with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, because you have the name? Andrea Lucas? We all knew that, didn't we? Andrea Lucas. So yeah, all white men, please come forward and file your claim with the EEOC, an agency designed for and created by the civil rights movement to remedy past discrimination, like what I was showing you about Eastman Kodak, where black people could not get jobs even though 55,000 employees worked at Kodak, and those were considered good jobs. I worked also at Bausch & Lomb in Rochester, which is an optical, that made eyeglass lenses. There were, at the same time, 1965, there were 8,000 workers, 0 African-American workers. And now the EEOC leader, Andrea Lucas, is saying, white men, please come forward and file your claims, because we know the real problem in society is that white men have been discriminated against. When you look at the history of the country on all fronts and come to the conclusion, it's so obviously sort of an appeal to a section of the white population to mobilize them on the basis that whatever problem they are encountering, it's a consequence of the civil rights revolution. So Russell Vought and the MAGA leadership, they want to take that part of the white population, galvanize them into a little reactionary racist army in order to reverse the social and economic and cultural changes that not only were good for society and good for people, but that inhibited capitalism. You know, those demands, you know, you had to build an access ramp for disabled people. You couldn't simply pollute the rivers at will. You couldn't poison the air at will. The Occupational Safety and Health Act, you know, capitalists have to give workers basic job safety. When I worked at Bausch and Lomb, which was in the early 1970s, the temperature there was 125 degrees in the unit. We were using chemicals which were later banned under OSHA. Every week, some worker would have some disgusting, terrible chemical burn, and they'd be like have third-degree burns. There was no safety regulations. And that's what Project 2025 wants to go back to, where this unfettered rule by capitalism can happen. But they couldn't do it, they couldn't get the job done unless they had a popular mass movement. So MAGA is the popular mass movement because Trump was popular with a certain part of the population. So all the work behind the scenes of the Federalist Society or ALEC or these different agencies and institutions to rewrite the laws against the civil rights revolution and all the women's movement and the social justice movements and the environmental movement, they were not succeeding. But with Trump, they had a man on horseback. They had what is needed for a right-wing counter-revolution is a mass base. These policies are so unpopular that MAGA felt we can do it with a mass base, but the mass base is only 30% of the country. So that's the question, everybody. If they have 30% of the population and the 70% don't agree with them, and yet the 70% don't do anything, or the 70% are waiting for November 2026 for a midterm election so they can vote for some Democrats who will immediately compromise with Trump. If that's the idea, if that's the thought process, we lose and MAGA wins. But we feel that MAGA won't win because that's not what's going to happen. And we think Minneapolis is a testament to that. I mean, Minneapolis is where, you know, George Floyd was killed there, May 25th, 2020. That was the first Trump regime year. And Trump tried to use the military against the masses of people in Minneapolis and around the country, including Washington, D.C. And by May 30th, all the Democratic governors and the mayors, including the mayor of Washington, was going along with the curfews and the suppression. And then remember, Trump walked across Lafayette Park to have his picture taken with that Bible in front of St. John's Church. And in order to get there, they had the police just pepper spray and hit all these people who are peaceful protesters with less than lethal munitions, which still cut up your body or destroy your eyes or whatever. And he walked through and he held his Bible there in front of St. John's. And that was the day he had a conference call with every governor saying, you either crack down or we're sending the army. He wanted to send the army then, just the way he's sending the military now. And what happened the next day? The next day, instead of the governors and the mayors being able to go along, tens of millions of people came into the streets all over the country. That's what happened, if we remember, June 1st, June 2nd, June 3rd, 2020. And that went on for 6 weeks. That went on for 6 weeks, and it changed the whole narrative. Even the NFL and Major League Baseball were like, let's take a knee. Like, really? These billionaires like, yeah, let's take a knee. Yeah, and the Confederate statue, that has to come down. We hate that. It's been there for 100 years, and we loved it last year, but now we hate it. We really hate it, and it doesn't stand for what we believe in. Anyway, the whole narrative shifted for a moment, but it was just a moment because everything then kind of got sidetracked into, well, who are you going to vote for? Biden or Trump? And so all of the energy from the street, which was so dynamic, it was 35 million people in the street, everybody said, let's really make a difference by electing Biden so we don't have a second Trump administration. So all of the energy got funneled into the Democratic Party and into the election of Biden. And what did Biden do? He reversed all the COVID aid programs. You know, the COVID aid program, which came under Trump and then Biden, the child, you know, you got $300 a month per child, every family. That brought childhood poverty in America down 50% in 1 year. And Biden ended the program, which shows that childhood poverty is a policy choice, right? That means they decided to spend the money on something else, not on that program. If you can eliminate childhood poverty by half in 1 year, it shows it's a completely remediable problem. So it's a policy choice. So our movement went with the Democrats because that's the game. The game is you hate the Republicans enough, you hate George W. Bush enough, we got to get him out of there. And who's going to take his place? Well, it's going to be a Democrat because the system is rigged so that only one of the two ruling class parties has a chance of winning. I'm with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Claudia de la Cruz, Karina Garcia, great campaign, promoted socialism, got huge number of votes, but they're excluded from the TV debates. They don't have $3 billion for TV ads. Many places we got on the ballot, the Democrats then spent like $100 million to get us off the ballot. And we were a minor party. But they spent an enormous amount of money in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Ohio. The system is rigged. So if you really want change, which we all do, it's understandable why people would want to vote Trump out and the Republicans out. Understandable, got it. But that's not where change comes from, because then what happens is that the Democrats, essentially because they are a ruling class party, either compromise with the far right or go even further in some way. In the case of war and peace, the Democrats, I would say, are even worse. So if we think back to what I said a few minutes ago, where does change come from? It's not the politicians, not changing the politicians. That Congress in 1964 was the same Congress as 1954. And yet the same Congress passed the most far-reaching legislation in American history, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, not because they changed, we changed, meaning we became political, we became active, our communities became active. The people once organized became an irresistible force. There are two kinds of change that can take place: far-reaching economic reform or revolution. Now, there have been two revolutions in the United States, 2.5. The American Revolution was a political revolution, the War of Independence, that they're now, Ken Burns documentary, interesting, watch it. But at the end of that war, the slave owners were still the slave owners, the enslaved people were still the enslaved people. The social fabric of society was not altered. It was just that the ruling class colonists became independent from the British ruling class. Doesn't mean it was unimportant, but that's what it was. The U.S. Civil War was more of a real revolution because the system of enslavement, which constituted the center of the American proletariat, was enslaved people. That system ended, and it hasn't come back yet. Yet meaning, I don't mean it's coming back. I mean, yet, in fact, it kind of came back 5 years later, 10 years later, with the defeat of Reconstruction, the bloody counter-revolution in the South, when Northern capitalists betrayed the struggle for equality and freedom by cooperating with rather than fighting against the old defeated slaveocracy. And then this defeated slaveocracy told the story of the Civil War from their point of view. In New York City, up until the 1930s, the Civil War was taught from the point of view of the Southern defeated slave owners. It was only the teachers' union in New York that insisted that the war be taught to New York City public students from the vantage point of the North. And that was because the teachers' union was led by communists at that time. And they insisted that the North teach the northern version of the Civil War. So in a way, the South won the Civil War, even though the system of slavery, which had been the centerpiece of labor in the South, was formally and technically and legally ended, unless you're incarcerated, in which case the Constitution says you can be enslaved if you're convicted of a crime. So how does change happen? It's not going to be by supporting the Democrats. It's not going to be by supporting the lesser evil. The problem really is the system. The ruling class has different factions and tendencies. If our movement says, look, one section of the ruling class is really bad, so we're going to follow and be tied to another section of the ruling class, then the idea of system change goes away. And if you believe that the real problem is the system and that society could be reorganized such, for instance, that a new constitution would say, Bill of Rights, number 1, free health care for every person in the United States, every person who lives here, not just citizens. Number 2, free education up to and through secondary education, absolutely free. Third, housing must be affordable. No one can take your home from you. And housing can never be, say, more than 6% of your income, or free. 4, that you are guaranteed employment at good salary, or if you can't work, that you're entitled to a basic income that can never be taken from you. Like, these are the first 4 rights. The only rights that we have in our Bill of Rights is our inhibitions on what the government can't do. It can't inhibit our free speech. So homeless people have a right to speak, but they don't have a right to a home, right? If you've gone bankrupt because you can't pay your doctor's bill, you have a right to speak about that, but you don't have the right to go to a doctor for free. So instead of having a Bill of Rights that are simply inhibitions or prohibitions about what the government can't do on the political level, a socialist Bill of Rights would be what society guarantees to every person. I was in Cuba recently. Cuba is suffering. Cuba is really suffering because of the blockade. I mean, it was in the 60s and early 70s, by Caribbean standards, Cuba was relatively affluent, and a healthcare system second to none, and a life expectancy that's even still the same as the United States in spite of the blockade. But they can't buy anything. They can't sell anything. They can't trade. They can't do any of that. There's blackouts every day. It's terrible. It's awful. Article 5 of the Cuban Constitution says the state has an obligation to provide free health care services to all of the people who are on the island of Cuba for their entire lifetime, from the time they're born to the time they die. I mean, here's a country that's so poor because of the blockade, and yet they make a legal guarantee to their people that health care is a right, not a privilege. Like, if Cuba can do that under these circumstances, just think of what the United States can do. Zoran Mamdani's election was a stupendous blow against the mega narrative about how right-wing the country is going to be. And his demands are positive and progressive, like free buses. That's great. They should be free. So should subways. So should health care. So should the things that I just talked about. But in order to do it, in order to get to the system, and then we'd look back at the old system and say, the way people look now at feudalism and say, oh, we could never go back there. The way to do it is we have to build an independent people's movement that has, I believe, socialist understanding, socialist values, socialist and perspective, a perspective about how change happens, that people make change. When we change because we become politically active and struggling, then change happens. Whether it's far-reaching reforms like the civil rights movement or environmental protection, or the other, and I would say even more profound change of revolution, It's when we change, when the people change. And so that's when we go out and demonstrate, when we leaflet, when we do all the things that we're doing, we're not trying to impress Donald Trump or Chuck Schumer. We're trying to reach out to the people in the working class, the young people especially, the people who are the agents of change, because if they become involved as we're involved, we can make the change that we want. All right, so with that said, scattered applause. So, less scattered. We have I'm sure Saidi will mention it, but we have 7 more classes, and if you look at the curriculum, it's incredible. The speakers, the variety of people who are teaching, it's just an amazing course. So I really do encourage everybody to stay with this 8-week process. You'll learn a lot, we'll get to know each other more, and we'll be building this movement together. Thank you.
All right, we have about 25-30 minutes for Q&A, a little over. So let's start with a round of questions in person. So what we're gonna do is we have Danny over here who's gonna help, and Veronica in the back run mics. Please raise your hand, and we'll kind of see how many people have a question, and then we'll grab a few questions, and then I think we'll do a round of 3 or so, start there, and then we'll begin. All right, so if you have a question in person, raise your hand, and if you're on Zoom, you could start putting them in the Q&A. All right, let's start on this side. So I'll start from the back and then go to the front.
Thank you for such a compelling class. I'm really looking forward to the next 7 weeks. I have like a 3-part question. I'll make it quick. First question is, the first general strike in almost a century in this country is massive. How do we make sure that we're infusing a socialist horizon within that movement, especially as it continues this week? Thinking a lot about in 2020 how 35 million people took the streets that summer, and one of the reflections is that there wasn't a lot of lasting organization that was created from that people's movement. So how do we make sure lasting organization is created from this movement, and what has been the role of organization in making this movement possible? Thank you.
You want to take maybe 1 or 2 more? All right, we have someone here in the front, Danny, with the watermelon hat. Was that you? Hey, my friend. Hold on for 2 seconds.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Hey, you mentioned about earlier with like the whole thing with how we live in a capitalist system and how it almost feels as if there's been a concentrated effort throughout not just like the education system, but also with like media and villainizing the other systems, socialism, communism, especially if I come from Florida, so I'm familiar with like Miami, and we all know there's a demographic that does not have good relations with communism for, reasons. But the thing is that how do you fight back against the narratives or the overarching narratives that come when you mention the S word, as some would say, like with Mondani election, that was like a big thing opposition would say at him was like, oh, he's a socialist, he's gonna turn New York City into like, Mondanistan or some stuff like that. So how do you, I guess, in your own.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And I'm with it, but the thing is, it's like when you're from the South, you got to deal with a lot of folks that just automatically think of the worst case scenarios. Like my thing is, how do you fight back against those overarching narratives?
You want to take maybe 2 more?
Sure.
All right, I'm going to get some folks on this side. There's one in the middle and then one on the left. Wait.
Hello. We're talking about the need for cultural revolution in the present day, specifically to eradicate the cultures of racism and anti-blackness and just the colonial fabric of the country. I know there's a lot of great Marxist theory talking about cultural revolution. Specifically, Maoism talks a lot about cultural revolution. I know that the Black Panther Party followed a lot of Maoist principles. And I was just curious if any Maoist theory was going to be covered in the scope of this class.
Hi. Thanks again. I'm just curious if you could opine a little bit on the way religion kind of interwoven into all of this. I'm Jewish, and I think anti-Semitism and Israel and all of that kind of comes into play in a lot of these conversations. And then also, looking back at the way religion played in the civil rights movement, I'm just kind of curious as to the way you see religion can be maybe a force for good or also kind of a hindrance to the progress.
What do you want? I'm letting you decide. Okay.
All right, I think I saw one. So let's start there and maybe take that front one.
Hi, hello. Okay. I live in Inwood, uptown, and right now the strategy that we are trying to implement to kind of connect to all of this is through our tenant associations, trying to create a block association, creating a local chapter in our neighborhood with the idea, with the goal to create like New York City's, a New York citywide tenant association. That's the kind of path that we've taken to try to really grow a base. My question is, where does, in your opinion, what place or what position do tenant associations, neighborhood local chapters to unions, and then a citywide tenant union, how can that help in this effort? Because that's kind of like the step that we've taken to try to include everyone and politicize everyone. And so just wanted to know your perspective on that path. Thank you.
There was one other.
Hi, thank you for the discussion. I have one statement, then one question. I work for the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and tomorrow we will be hosting a Stop Taking Our People event. This is our kickoff for what's going on all across the country with ICE detaining and disappearing people. So I highly implore folks that are looking to find a source and to support an organization. We have a bunch of different advocacy and coalition building as well. It'll be at 1 p.m. tomorrow. So this is hosted by the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and I would say it's a very good and safe space for people to ask questions and learn about coalition building, mutual aid programming, and also what's going on in Minneapolis. And then furthermore, we all know that ICE is all across the country already, so I just wanted to mention that. And then my question, you had touched on something I had never heard about before, the equal employment opportunity with Andrea Lucas. I know about the organization itself, but where should people go if they are being discriminated against with their employer? Because we've seen across the country, people are losing their jobs. And I just wonder, I see so many GoFundMe. The point of GoFundMe was not for those kind of resources, but where should people go if they are being discriminated against? Thank you for the discussion.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so to the first question, first three-part question. Like in Minneapolis and in these mass movements, how do we infuse it with a socialist horizon? I think there's a couple of different elements to that. One, people who are socialist should not self-censor themselves when they're involved in a mass movement. If you're a socialist and you're doing work alongside people who are not socialist, let them know that you're a socialist and why and what your explanation for it is. Because frequently people have never heard anything other than, as you pointed out, like a negative anti-socialist stereotype. In terms of socialists, like I'm in the Party for Socialism and Liberation, we supported the Minneapolis strike. We helped organize people all over the place in Minneapolis and around the state. We brought PSL signs or literature, but a lot of it we weren't trying to like make it just a place to promote the PSL or even to promote socialism, because the general strike was about something else. The general strike was about how to get ICE out. So I think that it's like there is an artfulness to politics where people who are socialists should not censor themselves. They should try to become more confident in their own capacity to communicate, like in classes like this. We should communicate with each other. We should practice. We should become good purveyors of information about socialism. And when we meet people who seem to be like-minded, in my mind, you have to have an organization to bring them to. One of the reasons we have a party is that when people become interested and become involved, to come into an organization that actually has scale, that has efficacy, has competence, has trained organizers, can be effective, I think it makes people feel that their involvement really makes a difference, as opposed to being unorganized or sort of scattershot. But I think there has to be a sensitivity to any mass movement. If the mass movement is not in what its main thing is about is not socialism, it's about, in this case, getting ICE out of a community, I think we should focus on the issue at hand. And at the same time, sort of bring in the socialist ideas and a socialist organization and be very welcoming to people to come in. And, PSL does a lot of, we do a lot of sessions where people may or may not want to join the party. They want to learn more about it to see, is it something I'm interested in? We do a lot of that kind of outreach so that people can have a forum to come to. That's one way. And then I think that in other venues, when we're talking about Minneapolis, like tonight, I've been very active in support of the ICE Out campaign, but I'm speaking as a socialist. So I'm not at all times I'm not shouting socialism from the rooftops at every moment, but I'm also finding venues and areas where we can actually talk about why the problem really is the system. It's not just this or that policy. But I think it is the priority to infuse a movement with socialism. The question is how to do it in a way that brings people in and doesn't sort of create a wall between a socialist movement and a mass movement. And the role of the organization I kind of touched on. How to deal with the S word, as you said it. In Florida, where you have this concentration of Cuban counter-revolutionaries, Venezuelan counter-revolutionaries, and the political establishment is so right-wing and racist anyway, not to say anything more, but the demographics in Florida make it very complicated. And it's almost like being a socialist is almost like you're admitting that you are the devil. People don't see your horns and tail immediately, but they must be somewhere. So again, I think that the anti-socialism is a prejudice. It should be understood as a prejudice because it's been cultivated as a prejudice by the ruling class. And so a lot of times you tell people, oh, I'm a socialist, and they're like, help. But I don't think it's as deep of a prejudice as racism. And I don't think it's as deep of a prejudice as anti-gay bigotry was. Like the idea that people of the same sex could get married. Like 30 years ago, that seemed impossible because that was thousands and thousands of years of patriarchy. And look, in a couple decades, like the idea of marriage equality has become a social norm. That's how, consciousness can shift pretty dramatically. But the reason it shifted was when the government and the Supreme Court and the military kept passing this, and this anti-gay measure, the LGBTQ community didn't go into the closet, didn't retreat. They're like, no, we're going to keep fighting. And just being open and out may change the political equation. And there were enough people doing that it made it impossible to stick with the prejudice. So I think that's what will happen with socialism. I don't think it's going to be as hard to overcome as these other prejudices, which are older and longer. And Americans don't know what they're hating. Like when you tell them, what do you hate about socialism? They don't know, because they don't know what socialism is. They just know it's bad, and they equate it with an absence of democracy. Unlike the glorious democracy that we have. A cultural revolution, will Chairman Mao, Leanne will answer that question better than I will, because she's the anxiety. So I don't know the political leanings of all of the presenters. The cultural, it's not just Mao. Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Fidel, Rosa Luxemburg, Clara Zetkin, all revolutionaries are very concerned with the issue of cultural revolution. And it's largely misunderstood. And it means different things in different places. In China, there was what was called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution in 1966. And basically, that was a section of the Communist Party of China felt that the old system of hierarchy was reproducing itself, even though the people were communists and Marxists and socialists. There was a privileged sector of society, a less privileged, and then the workers and peasants in China, who numbered more than 1 billion, their lives had not changed that much since 1949. So they had changed in some ways, like important ways, like they weren't starving to death, and there was education, but they were still peasants and workers. And what Mao was trying to innovate with that section of the Communist Party of China was how to elevate the social status of the workers and peasants, the poor, and give them a chance to be the leaders. And that meant that some of the leadership was demoted and some other people were promoted. And a lot of those decisions were made based on social class. And it was very controversial, obviously. Try to upset a class stratified society in a short number of years is a huge and complicated undertaking. Xi Jinping, just this is anecdotal, but Xi Jinping's father, who was a leader of the Chinese Revolution along with Mao, was one of the people who was demoted. And so he was sent and had to work. They took the whole family, and instead of having a privileged position in an urban area, they had to work on a farm for 7 years. The American media talks about that as like a crime against nature. Like, what could be worse than a privileged urban person having to go live like a peasant? But Xi Jinping said it was the most meaningful part of his life, because if he had just led this kind of privileged existence, he would have been missing a lot. He would have been thinking about socialism from a textbook or from a doctrine, rather than from what it means for the lives of people. So even though it's been repudiated by China, the Cultural Revolution, it made many social changes in China that are enduring, I think. It's like any social upheaval has pros and cons. And you think about the Miami and the Cuban counter-revolutionaries in Venezuela. In every revolution, there's counter-revolutionaries too. And they have a dominating impact. 1/3 of the people in the colonies, the white people in the colonies of the 13 colonies that fought against British, 1/3 were fighting with the British. So only 1/3 of the population was for independence, another 1/3 was for remaining with the king, and the other 1/3 were like, I just want to live. I'm not political. Anyway, if it's not Mao, it'll be something cultural for sure, and maybe it will be Mao. in this class. I just don't know. Your question about religion, and you mentioned that you were Jewish, and I didn't know what you meant exactly. Do you mean because you are religious, or just what it means for religious people, or? Yeah, okay, that's cool. Yeah, got it. So in the South, in the role in the civil rights movement, since that's what we were talking about, the black church obviously was the anchoring institution that had been, like, in a way, the only institution that the old ruling class allowed to exist in the black community. So it was there, it was stable, it was an anchor, it was a safe space in a way. And it became the organizing center for much of the civil rights movement. And also, because the civil rights movement develops in the 1950s, that's when the anti-communist witch hunt is the greatest. So in the South, before that, the leadership of the civil rights movement was the Communist Party. But then the Communist Party was essentially driven into illegality in the late 40s. So the black clergy actually became a substitute vehicle for this civil rights movement. But it was the anchor. But then you think, okay, what's the role of religion? That's a positive role. The KKK also prayed to the same God, and they had a cross. They liked to burn them. They, in the name of God, in the name of Jesus, they were for a system of extreme oppression, and so the two class forces both use God as a unifier for their war. But from a Marxist point of view, we would say that was a war between the oppressed and the oppressors, even though both sides couched the struggle in theological or religious terms. And that's been true throughout history. You know, liberation theology in Latin America is the religion of those who took up the arms against the military dictatorships imposed by the U.S., and the military dictatorships imposed on the people by the United States also used the Bible and Jesus and their love of God to justify the military dictatorship. So, in a way, religion, from a Marxist point of view, masks or camouflages the underlying struggle, which is a class struggle. It's a struggle between oppressor and oppressed. And at a certain point, people choose the iconography and the language and the philosophy that they're familiar with. And more people are familiar with God and religion in the scripture than they are with Capital or the Communist Manifesto. So it sort of reverts because of that. But that's one of the reasons why, going back to how does the movement, socialist movement, infuse a socialist horizon into a mass movement, it's also important that socialist literature actually get into the hands of people. So from my point of view, as a socialist and as an atheist, I consider Marxism to be very highly illuminating. And I don't read Marx the way, say, a Christian would read the Bible. I don't think this is the word. Karl Marx has spoken, or Chairman Mao has spoken, and so it should be. But I used to be a Christian. I started off as a Christian, but I evolved into something else, and I think the language, the words, the concepts of Marxism are extremely illuminating. And one of the reasons we're having classes and series like this is to popularize socialist ideas in a popular way. Like the language that I'm using and that other teachers are using, you don't have to have read anything from Marx to get the basic gist of what we're presenting. But what we're presenting, or at least what I'm presenting, is very much rooted in the works of Marx, and also in the works of Lenin, by the way, who I consider to be, for myself at least, the Marxist who taught me Marxism was Lenin. Marx is from a different century, 19th century, different era of struggle. So I've read everything I could read by Lenin, and I've read it as many times as I could read it. and I've taught it, and each time I read it, I find something new in it, and I find it very illuminating. And I really want to encourage people to try to read socialist literature. More recently produced literature is going to be easier to read than something that was written in 1916. But still, it's good to go back to the classics if you possibly can. And if it's hard, read with some friends. Do it together. Do it at a coffee shop. Inglewood. I think the tenant association is great. The reason New York City used to be affordable, Zoran got elected on affordability. New York was very affordable. When I first moved to New York City, way back when in the 70s, I had a 2-bedroom apartment at 22nd Street and 8th Avenue, and the rent was $90. If you take inflation into account, however, that would be $500. But still, that's 2-bedroom apartment at 22nd Street and 8th Avenue. It wasn't that great of a building, but the reason was this. New York City was organized, the tenant association was led by the left. The Communist Party, Workers' World Party, the other parties, they all came together in this giant tenants movement in New York City, and every area was organized. So there was rent control here, real rent control, not rent stabilization, rent control. And those apartments, as people moved or died, went out of rent-controlled status. But for instance, even in the year 1999, my sister had her apartment on East 10th Street on top of Tompkins Square, and it was still $339 for a very big apartment. That was because of the left. So if you can succeed, we're all going to benefit. And I think it's a great way to build a movement.
All right. All right, we have about 10 more minutes. There's a bunch of questions online. Can I pose about 3 of them to you? And
yes,
we'll see where we
I
go?
want to tell people, I forgot, several months ago, I kind of double booked. I agreed to teach a class tonight at 8:30 that's a remote class for UCLA, which is going to start in 15 or 20 minutes. So I have to run here back to the computer. So that's why we're going to cut it a little bit short.
Okay, I'll raise these and then I'll pass it over to you. Okay. The first one is, as we've seen with Bovino's removal from Minneapolis in response to the general strikes and mass protests in Minnesota, how can we organize and coordinate movements that produce more action and effective responses by the current administration?
All right. Say it one more time and just a little more.
All right. As we've seen with Bovino's removal from Minneapolis in response to the general strikes and mass protests in Minnesota, how can we organize and coordinate movements that produce more action and effective responses by the current administration?
Yeah. And is there a second one? Or?
Yeah, I'll raise them all to
Yeah,
you. And then
okay.
Okay. Did Nixon and LBJ really help us, or did they just quell efforts toward the necessary revolution through the appearance of change at the expense of material change? I know you said it was not a socialist revolution, but was it a revolution at all then, when capitalism, poverty, and wealth are racialized and gendered to the extent that they are? And the third question is, the algorithm shows me a lot of people from various political backgrounds coming together over removing ICE and towards the general strike on Friday. How do you think we can keep up this momentum and keep pulling together and fighting back despite our many varied ideologies?
All right. And so this first and third are a little bit overlapping. The reason there hasn't been a general strike in the United States in 90 years is complicated, but in a way, the Montgomery bus boycott was a general strike of a certain type. The black community in Montgomery, Alabama, did not take a bus for 11 months. Well, no, 381 days. So 13 months. Everybody walked and they carpooled, and it was like, the Supreme Court finally intervened and outlawed segregation on public transportation in the state of Alabama. That's really what got the civil rights movement really going. So in a way, that was kind of like a general strike. It was like a whole community worked together for 13 months. And, you know, a real general strike, and by a real general strike, I mean something that's not simply a day long, that goes on for many days. This is what happens. And this is like really important to understand why the American bourgeoisie does everything to stop the general strike, and why the labor leaders are also a little bit afraid of it, because if it doesn't fully succeed, they fear the repercussions from the government and the bourgeoisie, especially because they have collective bargaining agreements that make strikes not legal except under certain circumstances related to their own contract. So if, let's say, Minneapolis went out on strike for like an indefinite period, it's not just shutting down the city. It's also a decision by the strike committee, by the executive committee of the strikers, not only who doesn't work, but who should work. Because if you're on strike for, let's say, a week, and the whole city is shut down for a week, who's going to pick up the garbage? Okay, sanitation workers need to be on the job. What about people who are sick or wounded and they need to go to a hospital? They need healthcare professionals there. What about firefighters? Should they be on strike? Like, the strike committee then decides not only who doesn't work, but also who does work. So production begins under the authority of a class different from the bourgeoisie, different from the capitalists. And as soon as you have that arrangements going, you have what's called dual power, dual, D-U-A-L, in case I'm unclear. Dual power, meaning a second power. There's the power of the ruling class as manifested by the government. And what gives the government its a power? It has the legal right to use violence. It has the legal right to employ armed people against the citizenry or non-citizenry. The dual power formula that emerges organically out of a real general strike presents to the working class the idea that the working class itself could run production. It organically leads people in the direction of socialist conclusions, that we can reorganize society, have a new system, and a new class power, that we don't have to simply be workers who come to work every day and have no say-so in anything, but we do it because we need wages, because without wages we can't feed our families. So the question of dual power comes up. So the bourgeoisie in America, being very class conscious as a ruling class, does everything in its power to discourage the general strike. Right now they're putting a lot of pressure through the Democratic Party, I think, on many labor leaders not to support this general strike. You know, people say, well, you know, we're tired. Well, you know, go to a nice detention center. You know, then you'll feel really tired because people are packed like sardines. Or they are worried that, and this happened in the Montgomery bus boycott too in the beginning, they're worried if the general strike is good for a day or two, you can proclaim victory, we did it. But if it goes for a week and people start to go back to work, then you could look like you failed. So it's always easier to proclaim an easy victory than risk failure. There's a lot at stake when you go on general strike. It's a big responsibility. And so I think the labor leaders, for a number of reasons, legal reasons, because of their contracts, because of governmental law, because of fear, because of the lack of tradition of general strikes, and sometimes territoriality, where people are like, this is my turf and I don't want to share it with somebody else's turf. So the labor movement isn't the ones leading the general strike, generally speaking. That's why for this effort on Friday to succeed, and even if it doesn't fully become a general strike, we're going in the direction of a general strike. There's going to be a general strike in the United States, but it's not going to be simply from the labor unions, even though the labor unions will play a key role. it should be a people's general strike. It could be workers, it could be young people, small business people. Like the real earth-shaking general strikes are people's movements, and they're cross-class movements sometimes. But the moment calls for it. We have to stop ICE. We cannot let this go on. So we're in discussions with people all over, like in the last days, people are saying, I'm not sure we should do it. Other people are like, yeah, let's do it. But when we talk to average people who are not in leadership, everybody thinks like, yeah, let's shut it down. Let's shut it down and stop ICE. Let's do this. Nixon and LBJ, they made many concessions to stop a revolution from happening. And because a revolution didn't happen, a lot of the same manifestations, poverty, mass incarceration, all of those ugly features of capitalism are still with us. But my point is that doesn't mean it was unimportant. The civil rights revolution changed America. America is not as racist as it used to be. What I was talking about when I was describing the 60s, there is a lot of racism in America. It's not like it was. It's not as bad as it was. And also, the idea of multiracial environments that were almost never existed in the United States for hundreds of years now are pretty common, at least in urban areas. And also, I'm from Western New York. I was up in, I went up to a county fair up in the Finger Lakes, and it was a small town. And like, of the young couples, like half the people were interracial couples. That would have never existed 30 years ago. People would have been like, matter of fact, I had a slide that I didn't use. It was the Mildred and Richard Loving slide. And this, I'm going to end here because I have to go to California now. Okay, he looks like he's very angry, which maybe, they were married in Virginia, and they moved to DC because they were told that they were going to be arrested and put in prison for 1 year because interracial marriage was illegal in 1966 in Virginia. So the judge gave them a choice, go to prison for 1 year or leave the state of Virginia. So they left. So she missed her family and she wanted to come back. So a couple years later, they came back and they were arrested and sent to prison. And then the case went to the Supreme Court in 1967. Okay, their last name is Loving. Richard and Mildred Loving. It's a historical coincidence. Supreme Court said these laws are illegal. And that's when interracial marriage became legal. That was 1967. That was 2 years before Woodstock. So people think about the 60s as Woodstock or the left or this or that. But there was this. This was, America has changed a lot. And I think it's a fantasy by these Nazis and fascists and right-wing white supremacists that they can take the country back to where it was by using ICE brute force. As ICE tries to terrorize people, the masses of people, black, Latino, white, indigenous, Arab American, Asian American, we're uniting to stop them. And that's why I think we're going to win.
Let's send Brian to California with another round of applause. He wants to make it clear. He's not really going to California, but you know the feeling of it all. I'm going to turn this off. All right, everybody. How was that first class? All right, I thought it was pretty good. All right, so I'm just going to close this out really briefly here. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us for our first class. I want to send a reminder, actually, that as Brian emphasized throughout this class, that Minnesota put out a call, over the past weeks for a general strike, and hundreds of cities are taking that up, including us here in New York City, we're going to be here January 30th, 4 p.m. at Foley Square. Does everyone know where Foley Square is? Does anyone not know how to get there? Find any one of us, and we'll be there. No work, no school, no shopping. Bring everyone. Tell your friends. Tell your family. The call is, Minnesota put out the call. All of us across the country are answering it in any way, and we have to be there, and we have to make our message clear. I also want to thank you again for attending this first session. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was fruitful. I hope it stimulated lots of thoughts. I hope we're thinking, obviously, on our next steps. And I just want to do a quick shout out. There's over 100-something plus of us here in person. Some people are upstairs in the overflow room. There are 970 people who are on the Zoom. Right? And we've truly been able to make this programming happen that's accessible to all, that people are joining us from not only across the world, but across the country, in rural areas, in cities like New York, and cities across the country, from every single part of this country. We've been able to do it with your support, and we want to continue to make this, our educational programming, our cultural programming grow, and to continue to keep it accessible. So if you've donated already, thank you so much. If you haven't, please take the chance. If you could donate any bit, $5, that really helps us to keep this programming going. We literally see it, how packed this room is, how packed the Zoom is. This helps us bring educators, this helps us bring people here, it helps us get more books so we could stock our bookstore. So please, if you can, please donate to TPF. I love this space, it should continue, and we're in a fight to get a new home. So if we want this space to continue, it's gonna depend on all of us, or I might cry on stage. But anyway, donate to TPF, and thank you so much for coming. We'll see you next Tuesday for our class, Fire in the Fields, Black and Indigenous Alliance Against Slavery. Oh, and then we always close each class with a song, so hang out.
Whisper, listen, whisper, say we're free. Rumors flying, must be lying, can it really be? Can't conceive it, don't believe it, but that's what they say. Slave no longer, slave no longer.